Ouray, Colorado. September 1968. There is a mountain town in the San Juan Range that sits in a bowl of rock so complete and so vertical that when you drive into it, you feel less like you have arrived somewhere and more like you have been received. The mountains come down on all four sides. The Box Canyon walls rise 800 feet above the main street. The Uncompahgre River runs through the middle of it, cold and serious, the way mountain rivers are serious without ceremony, just moving because moving is what it does. John Huston had used the country around Ouray for True Grit. The picture was a Paramount production directed by Henry Hathaway, based on Charles Portis's novel about a one-eyed, whiskey-soaked, morally flexible but ultimately reliable United States Marshal named Rooster Cogburn who agrees to hunt down a killer across Indian Territory in exchange for the fee offered by a 14-year-old girl named Maddie Ross, whose father the killer has shot. Wayne had read the novel in galleys. He had called Hal Wallace, the producer, before the book was published. He had said he wanted the part. He was 61 years old at the time. He had been making westerns for 40 years. He had played lawmen and outlaws and soldiers and cowboys in a number of combinations so thorough that he had, by 1968, essentially mapped the entire moral terrain of the genre. He had played heroes. He had played men who were not heroes. He had played men who were both, which is the most interesting version. Rooster Cogburn was the most interesting version. He was not a good man in any uncomplicated sense. He drank too much. He had a flexible relationship with the law he nominally served. He was capable of violence that exceeded what strict necessity required. He had a past that he did not account for fully, and that came up around him the way the smell of smoke comes up around a man who has been near a fire. And he was capable, at the center of himself, of something that all the drink and the violence and the moral flexibility could not quite extinguish. A kind of stubborn, unglamorous decency. The kind that does not announce itself but simply appears, when the moment requires it, in the form of a man riding across a field with a girl across his saddle and a broken bridle held in his teeth, and a rifle going in each hand. Wayne understood the character. He understood it, he said later, better than any character he had played. What he did not understand, going into the production, was exactly how to play it. And this is where it gets interesting. Henry Hathaway was 69 years old in 1968 and had directed Wayne before, 3 times, and their relationship had the specific texture of 2 strong-willed men who respected each other's craft and did not always agree about how to apply it. Hathaway wanted Rooster big. Wayne wanted him small. This was the central argument of the pre-production and the early shooting days. Not small in the literal sense. Wayne at 61 was not physically small. He was still the largest presence in any room he entered, still carried himself with the particular gravity of a man whose body had been an instrument of his work for 40 years and who had not forgotten how to use it, small in the internal sense. Wayne believed that Rooster Cogburn, played correctly, was a man who did not know he was going to be the hero of the story. A man who had been sliding for so long in one direction that he had stopped expecting the direction to change, who took Maddie's job because he needed the money and not for any more elevated reason, who found himself doing the right thing at the end, not because he had reformed or been redeemed, but because when the actual moment came he could not do otherwise, and that inability was the truest thing about him. Hathaway thought audiences needed more signal, more indication of the heroism that was coming, more architecture to hold the character together across 2 hours. They argued about it, not destructively, productively, the way 2 men argue about a thing when they are both trying to find the right answer and are willing to be wrong. Then, in the second week of September, a man came onto the set outside Ouray and the argument resolved itself. His name was Harold Cogburn. He was 81 years old. He had driven from his home in Gunnison, 2 hours east, because his granddaughter had told him there was a movie being made about a man with his name in the mountains outside Ouray, and at 81 Harold Cogburn had decided that the list of things worth driving 2 hours for was short enough that a thing like that made the list. He arrived in a truck that had been new in 1951 and had been arguing with new ever since. He parked in the designated area and got out with the particular deliberateness of a very old man who has learned to allocate his movements carefully, not because he is frail, but because he has been alive long enough to understand that deliberateness is a form of respect for your own machinery. He wore a hat that had been on his head for years, dark felt brim shaped by decades of being grabbed and replaced in wind. He wore work clothes, not his best and not his worst. The clothes of a man who did not dress differently for occasions than for the regular day because the regular day was the occasion. He had a cane. He used it without embarrassment, the way you use a tool when the tool is right for the work. The production assistant who encountered him in the parking area was 24 years old and new to location work, and handled the situation with the instinctive courtesy of a young person confronting an elderly stranger who clearly had a purpose and clearly intended to pursue it. He brought Harold Cogburn to the base camp. He brought him, specifically to the area outside Wayne's trailer, because that was the appropriate place to bring someone who had come to the set of a John Wayne picture with a purpose, and because the assistant had the instinct, which would serve him well in his career, that this particular old man was not a problem to be managed, but a situation to be introduced. Wayne was outside the trailer with the script pages for the afternoon sequence. He looked up. He saw Harold Cogburn. He looked at the production assistant. "Who is this?" he said. The production assistant told him. Wayne was quiet for a moment. He looked at Harold Cogburn. Harold Cogburn looked back at him with the unhurried appraisal of a man who has been alive long enough to look at things without rushing the looking. "Harold Cogburn," Wayne said. "That's right," Harold said. His voice had the particular quality of very old voices in the high country, dry and unaffected, shaped by altitude and weather and years of talking to people at a distance across mountain air. "Come sit down," Wayne said. They sat for 2 hours. The afternoon shooting schedule did not begin on time. Hathaway found out why and made a decision, which was that it could wait, because Hathaway had been making pictures for 40 years and knew when something was happening that the picture needed more than the schedule did. Nobody recorded the conversation. There were people near enough to hear portions of it. The production assistant who had brought Harold in, a makeup person who had come to find Wayne for the afternoon's work, and found him occupied and decided not to interrupt, a grip named Tom Schaefer who was eating lunch nearby, and who later described what he observed without being able to report the content precisely because he had not been close enough. What Schaefer said was that it looked like 2 old men talking. Not a movie star and an old man. 2 old men. He said Wayne was leaning forward in his chair the way a man leans when he is listening, and not performing listening. He said Harold Cogburn talked with his hands sometimes and stared at the canyon wall sometimes and looked at Wayne directly sometimes, and that Wayne took it all in the same way without interrupting except to ask something, and then the something was answered, and then more talking. He said at one point Harold laughed at something Wayne said. Not politely. Really laughed. The short, surprised laugh of a man who found something genuinely funny that he had not expected to find funny. He said at another point Wayne was quiet for a long time after Harold said something, looking at the ground, and that whatever Harold had said was not funny. He said Harold Cogburn left after 2 hours the same way he arrived, deliberately, with his cane and his old truck, and drove east toward Gunnison. He said Wayne sat outside the trailer for a few more minutes after the truck was gone. Then he picked up his script pages. He went inside. He came back out 20 minutes later and told the production assistant to tell Hathaway he was ready. What Harold Cogburn told him was not recovered in any single complete account. It was assembled afterward from the edges, from things Wayne said to Hathaway the next day that caused Hathaway to change his mind about the argument they had been having, from things Wayne said to Kim Darby, who played Maddie, in a conversation between shots that Darby later described in an interview, from a comment Wayne made to a journalist the following year, not about the conversation directly but about his understanding of Rooster that he dated to a specific afternoon in September of 1968. Harold Cogburn, as best as these edges can reconstruct, had lived a life in the high country that bore a specific resemblance to the life the novel described. Not dramatically, not with wanted posters in outlaw territory and a 14-year-old girl on a vengeance errand. The resemblance was structural. He had been a man, for a long portion of his life, who was going in a direction and did not expect to change direction, who had settled into a version of himself that he had not chosen deliberately but had arrived at through accumulated choices, each one of which had seemed like the available option at the time, and all of which together had produced a man he recognized in the mirror but would not have planned. He had done things he was not proud of. He said this to Wayne without elaboration, and Wayne did not ask for elaboration. He had also done things that surprised him. Moments when something he had not known was in him had come out and acted in a way he could not account for by the story he had been telling himself about who he was. He told Wayne about one of those moments. It involved a winter in 1921 and a family stranded in the mountains above Gunnison in weather that had closed the road for 3 weeks, and a decision Harold had made that he could not fully explain then, and could not fully explain now, at 81, except to say that when the moment came the explanation seemed beside the point. He said, "You do not know what you will do until the moment asks you." He said it as a simple observation, without philosophy, the way a man states something he has observed to be empirically true over 81 years of paying attention to himself and the people around him. Wayne looked at the ground for a long time. Then he said, "That's Rooster." Harold looked at him. "That's the character," Wayne said. "That's what I've been trying to find." Harold said he didn't know anything about characters. Wayne said that was all right, that it was helpful anyway. What changed in Wayne's performance after that afternoon was not large. That is the important thing to understand. It was not a transformation. He did not become a different actor, or find a different register he had never used. What changed was the quality of the not knowing. Before the conversation, when Wayne played Rooster's uncertainty, the uncertainty had a slight architecture to it, a faint suggestion of the man he would become by the end, the heroism visible in outline even in the scenes that were supposed to be about the failing and the drift. After the conversation, the uncertainty was real, not performed real, actually real, in the way an actor achieves actual reality in a character when they have found the true thing underneath the written thing. The true thing was what Harold Cogburn had said. You do not know what you will do until the moment asks you. Rooster Cogburn did not know. That was the point. He had done enough things he was not proud of to have a reasonable basis for doubting himself. And when the moment came, and he did the thing that became the image on the poster, the thing that became the scene that became the reason the Academy gave Wayne the award he had been waiting 40 years for, the reason it worked, the reason it earned what it earned, was that the man doing it was genuinely surprised. Not performed surprise, real surprise. The surprise of a man discovering, at the moment of action, that the thing in him he had doubted was still there. Hathaway saw it in the dailies. He stopped arguing about Small Wayne won the Academy Award for Best Actor in 1970. He had been nominated before, once, for Sands of Iwo Jima in 1949, and had not won, and had carried that for 20 years with the specific quality of a man who does not complain about something but does not forget it either. He accepted the award from Barbara Streisand at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion on April 7, 1970. And the acceptance was the thing that everyone who was there said they remembered, not triumphant, moved. The real thing, not the performed version, the surprise of a man discovering at the moment of recognition that the thing he had doubted was still there. Harold Cogburn watched it on television in Gunnison. He was 83 years old. His granddaughter was in the room. She had been the one who told him about the movie in the first place, who had suggested the drive to Ouray, who had perhaps done as much as anyone to produce the outcome she was now watching on the television in her grandfather's living room. She said Harold watched the acceptance speech without saying anything. When it was over, he turned the television off. She asked what he thought. He said he thought the man had figured something out. She asked what. He was quiet for a moment. He said, "What you've got left in you. It's one of the last things you find out." She wrote it down. Not then, the next morning, before she had forgotten it. She wrote it in the margin of a notebook she was using for her college work, which is an unlikely place for a thing like that to live, but it is where it lived, and she found it later when she was older and understood it in a way she had not understood it at 22. Harold Cogburn died in 1973. He was 86 years old. The obituary in the Gunnison paper said he had been a rancher and a miner, and in his later years a man who drove to Ouray twice a year because he liked the canyon. It did not mention true grit, not because the family was hiding it, because Harold had not considered it a significant thing about himself. He had gone to watch them make a movie about a man with his name, and had ended up talking to the actor for 2 hours, and the actor had won an award, and Harold had said it seemed like the man figured something out. That was the whole of it, from Harold's perspective. From another perspective, it was the whole of a performance. It was 40 years of a craft arriving at the moment that justified the 40 years, and the moment was made possible by an 81-year-old man in an old truck who had driven 2 hours because a thing made the list. Wayne died in 1979. He was 72 years old. He had made over 250 films. He had been the top box office draw in America for 25 years, which is a record that has not been approached. He had worked with Ford and Hawks and Hathaway and Huston and had been directed by the best directors of his era, and had been, by any technical assessment, one of the most naturally skilled actors of his generation, which is not a thing that gets said about him often, because the scale of his stardom tends to obscure the craft beneath it. The Oscar stayed on his desk at his Newport Beach house. Not in a case. On the desk where he worked, where he read scripts and made calls and did the business of being who he was. The people who worked with him said he kept it there not as a trophy but as a reminder of the afternoon in September of 1968, of what the afternoon had unlocked, of what Harold Cogburn had said. The picture is still the picture. You can watch it now, and you can watch the scene that everyone watches, the field and the horse and the broken bridle held in the teeth and the rifles going in both hands, and you can see what Hathaway saw in the dailies. The surprise. The real kind. The kind that comes from a man discovering at the moment of action that the thing he doubted was still there. You cannot see an 81-year-old man in an old truck from 1951. You cannot see 2 hours in camp chairs outside a trailer in the canyon country outside RA. You cannot see the winter of 1921 or the family stranded above Gunnison or the decision Harold made that he could not explain, except that when the moment came, the explanations seemed beside the point. But it is all in there. That is what 40 years of craft makes possible, not the performance, the receptivity. The ability to take a thing in and let it do what it needs to do to the work. Wayne had that. Harold Cogburn gave him the right thing. The craft knew what to do with it. You do not know what you've got left in you. It is one of the last things you find out. Harold said it at 83, watching a TV in Gunnison, the year a man he had talked to for 2 hours held a small gold figure in front of a room full of people who had spent 40 years watching him without quite seeing him. The granddaughter wrote it in the margin of a notebook. The notebook is in a box in a house in Gunnison. The box has not been opened in years. But the thing is still in it, waiting, the way the best things wait for the moment that asks for it. Here's the 500-word extension to insert before the closing CTA. Kim Darby was 21 years old when she played Maddie Ross. She was not an obvious choice for the role, and she knew it, and Hathaway knew it, and Wayne had opinions about it that he expressed and then set aside when the camera rolled, because Wayne was professional in the way that the best craftsmen are professional, which is that the work gets what it needs regardless of what you thought before the work started. Darby had something for the role that was not actable. You either had it or you did not. She had it. She was immovable. Not physically, internally. She had a quality of settled certainty that Maddie Ross required and that could not be manufactured by technique alone. The quality of a person who has decided what they think and is not going to be argued out of it by anyone's seniority or reputation or displeasure. Wayne noticed it in the first week. He noticed it the way he noticed things without announcing it, by adjusting to it, by playing Rooster slightly more off balance than he had planned. Because Darby's Maddie was so fixed that Rooster needed to be in motion around her, needed to be the thing that shifted while she held still, and that dynamic was the right dynamic, the one the novel had, and that the script was reaching for. After the afternoon with Harold Cogburn, the adjustment deepened. Darby noticed the change. She talked about it later in an interview, cautiously. The way you talk about something you observed clearly but cannot fully explain. She said that in the scenes they shot after the second week, Wayne was different in a way she could feel more than describe, that he was more present. That when Rooster looked at Maddie in those later scenes, there was something in it that had not been there before, a quality of recognition, of a man looking at something that was reminding him of something he had nearly forgotten about himself. She said it made her scenes easier, not because Wayne was softer or more accommodating, because he was more real, and when the person across from you is more real, your own reality deepens in response. The way a tuning fork responds to the right frequency. That is the hidden mechanism of the performance, not Wayne alone, not Darby alone. The two of them in the same scenes, one immovable and one discovering that the capacity for motion was still there, and the tension between those two things producing something neither of them could have produced independently. Hathaway framed it. The camera held it. The Academy recognized it. But it started in a conversation with an 81-year-old man who drove 2 hours because the thing made the list, and it completed itself in the dynamic between a 21-year-old woman who would not move and a 61-year-old man who finally did. That is the whole of it. That is how a performance becomes the performance. You do not know what you've got left in you. It is one of the last things you find out. Harold said it at 83, watching a television in Gunnison. The year a man he had talked to for 2 hours held a small gold figure in front of a room full of people who had spent 40 years watching him without quite seeing him. The granddaughter wrote it in the margin of a notebook. The notebook is in a box in a house in Gunnison. The box has not been opened in years. But the thing is still in it, waiting, the way the best things wait, for the moment that asks for it. If this one found you, pass it on. Share it with someone who is still finding out what they've got left. Subscribe if you haven't yet. More Duke stories coming.